Propaganda is the systematic use of messages, symbols, and communication to influence the opinions, emotions, attitudes, or behavior of a group of people. It is often used in politics, advertising, and media to shape public perception and manipulate beliefs. Understanding propaganda techniques is crucial for critically evaluating the information we encounter and recognizing when we are being influenced. In this guide, we'll explore the most common propaganda techniques, explaining how they work and their impact on the audience. 1. Bandwagon. Encouraging conformity. The bandwagon technique encourages people to adopt a behavior, belief, or attitude because everyone else is doing it. This technique exploits the human desire to fit in and be part of a group, suggesting that if the majority supports something, it must be right or desirable. For example, advertisements often use phrases like, "Join the millions who have switched to our product," to create a sense of urgency and peer pressure, encouraging people to conform to the popular choice. 2. Card stacking. Selective presentation of information. Card stacking involves presenting only the information that supports a particular viewpoint while omitting or downplaying opposing facts. This technique manipulates the audience's perception by providing a skewed or biased representation of reality. For instance, a political campaign might highlight only the achievements of a candidate while ignoring or minimizing their failures, creating an incomplete and misleading picture. 3. Glittering generalities. Using vague, positive words. Glittering generalities involve using vague, emotionally appealing words that are associated with highly valued concepts and beliefs. These words, such as freedom, justice, and honor, have positive connotations, but are often used without providing concrete evidence or explanations. For example, a politician might promise to bring freedom and prosperity without specifying how these goals will be achieved, relying on the emotional appeal of the words rather than substantive arguments. 4. Name-calling. Attacking the opponent. Name-calling is a technique that involves labeling an opponent or an opposing idea with a derogatory term in order to discredit them. This technique seeks to create a negative association in the audience's mind without addressing the actual merits of the argument. For example, a political figure might refer to their opponent as a radical or extremist to provoke fear and distrust, rather than engaging with their actual policies or ideas. 5. Plain folks. Appealing to the common man. The plain folks technique is used to convince the audience that the speaker or the message is aligned with the everyday experiences and values of ordinary people. This technique creates an impression of humility and relatability, making the speaker seem trustworthy and credible. For example, a politician might emphasize their humble origins or show themselves engaging in everyday activities like shopping at a local market to appeal to voters as one of them. 6. Testimonial. Endorsement by a respected figure. A testimonial is when a well-known or respected figure endorses a product, idea, or candidate. This technique leverages the authority, popularity, or expertise of the endorser to persuade the audience to accept the message. For instance, a celebrity endorsing a political candidate or a famous athlete promoting a health product is using their influence to sway public opinion. 7. Transfer. Associating positive symbols with an idea. Transfer is a technique that involves associating the qualities of one thing, often a respected symbol, with another to make the latter more acceptable. This technique aims to transfer the audience's feelings from one object to another. For example, a political ad might show a candidate standing in front of a national flag to evoke feelings of patriotism and suggest that the candidate embodies those same patriotic values. 8. Fear appeal. Instilling fear to influence behavior. Fear appeal involves presenting a frightening scenario or consequence to persuade the audience to adopt a particular behavior or belief. This technique plays on the audience's fears, often exaggerating dangers to prompt immediate action. For instance, a political campaign might warn that electing the opponent will lead to economic collapse or war, using fear to drive voters to support their candidate. 9. Repetition. Reinforcing the message. Repetition is a technique where a message is repeated multiple times to reinforce it in the audience's mind. The idea is that the more a message is heard, the more likely it is to be accepted as true or important. For example, a brand slogan repeated in every commercial increases brand recognition and can create a lasting impression on consumers, making them more likely to choose that brand. 10. Scapegoating. Blaming a person or group for problems. Scapegoating involves blaming a person, group, or organization for problems, regardless of their actual involvement. This technique diverts attention from the real issues and provides a simple explanation for complex problems. For instance, a political leader might blame immigrants for economic issues, creating a convenient target for public anger and frustration, even if the connection is not supported by evidence. 11. Loaded language. Using words with strong emotional connotations. Loaded language involves using words that carry strong emotional connotations to provoke an emotional response from the audience. These words are often charged with positive or negative feelings, influencing perception without logical reasoning. For example, calling a tax reform plan a tax relief package suggests that taxes are inherently burdensome, while tax fairness suggests an equitable redistribution, even though both terms might refer to the same policy. 12. Euphemism, softening the impact of harsh realities. Euphemism is a technique where mild or vague terms are used in place of harsh or direct ones to soften the impact of an idea or action. This technique is often used to make unpleasant or controversial issues more palatable. For instance, referring to civilian casualties as collateral damage in a military context downplays the human cost of military operations. 13. Logical fallacies, using flawed reasoning to persuade. Logical fallacies are errors in reasoning that undermine the logic of an argument. These fallacies are often used in propaganda to mislead or deceive the audience by presenting arguments that seem logical but are actually flawed. For example, a false dilemma fallacy might present only two extreme options when, in reality, there are more alternatives. This can force the audience to choose between two undesirable outcomes, pushing them toward the propagandist's preferred choice. 14. Appeal to authority, leveraging the influence of experts. Appeal to authority involves citing an authority or expert to support a claim, regardless of whether that authority is relevant to the topic. This technique relies on the perceived credibility of the authority figure to convince the audience. For example, a toothpaste brand might claim that 90% of dentists recommend our product, using the authority of dentists to persuade consumers, even if the statistic is not fully representative. 15. Demonization, portraying the opposition as evil. Demonization is a technique where the opposition is portrayed as evil, immoral, or dangerous. This creates a clear distinction between us, the good, and them, the bad, justifying extreme measures against the opposition. For instance, during wartime, propaganda might depict the enemy as barbaric or subhuman to rally public support for the war effort and dehumanize the opponent. 16. Appeal to tradition, arguing based on tradition. Appeal to tradition involves arguing that something is right or better simply because it has always been done that way. This technique leverages the audience's respect for tradition to resist change or innovation. For example, a campaign might argue against new policies by stating, "We've always done it this way," suggesting that tradition is a valid reason to reject new ideas. 17. Ad hominem, attacking the person instead of the argument. Ad hominem is a technique where the propagandist attacks the character or motive of the person making an argument rather than addressing the argument itself. This technique seeks to discredit the person rather than engaging with their ideas. For instance, in a political debate, a candidate might attack their opponent's personal life or character rather than addressing their policy proposals. 18. False equivalence, equating two unequal things. False equivalence is a technique that presents two opposing arguments or entities as being logically equivalent when in fact they are not. This can create the impression that both sides are equally valid, even if one is clearly weaker. For example, A news outlet might give equal weight to the views of a fringe conspiracy theorist and a respected scientist, creating the false impression that both viewpoints are equally credible. 19. Gaslighting, manipulating someone to question their reality. Gaslighting is a psychological manipulation technique where the propagandist makes someone doubt their own perceptions, memories, or sanity. This technique is often used to control or dominate others by making them question their reality. For example, a leader might deny making a controversial statement that was recorded and widely reported, insisting that those who remember it are mistaken or deceived. 20. Cherry-picking, selecting only favorable evidence. Cherry-picking involves selectively presenting only the evidence that supports a particular argument while ignoring evidence that contradicts it. This technique is used to create a biased or misleading narrative. For example, a report might highlight only the positive outcomes of a policy while omitting any negative consequences, giving a distorted view of the policy's effectiveness. 21. Transfer, associating a positive or negative symbol with a product or idea. Transfer involves associating a product, idea, or policy with something already viewed positively or negatively by the audience. This can include symbols, images, or people that evoke strong emotions. For example, an advertisement might feature a product alongside an American flag to evoke feelings of patriotism, suggesting that buying the product is an act of national loyalty. 22. Appeal to fear, using fear to influence decisions. Appeal to fear is a technique that uses fear to influence people's decisions and actions. It involves presenting a frightening scenario and suggesting that the only way to avoid it is to accept a specific viewpoint or take a certain action. For example, a public service announcement might use graphic images of car accidents to encourage people to wear seatbelts, playing on their fear of injury or death. 23. Appeal to pity, using sympathy to persuade. Appeal to pity is a technique that seeks to persuade by evoking sympathy or compassion from the audience. This technique is often used to manipulate emotions and elicit a sense of guilt or responsibility. For example, a charity campaign might show images of suffering children and ask for donations, using the emotional impact of the images to prompt action. 24. Cult of personality, elevating a leader to superhuman status. The cult of personality is a technique that creates an idealized, heroic, and at times worshipful image of a leader. This technique is often used in authoritarian regimes to build unquestioning loyalty and devotion to the leader. For instance, propaganda in North Korea frequently portrays its leaders as infallible and almost divine, elevating them to a status beyond ordinary human beings. 25. Stereotyping, oversimplifying groups of people. Stereotyping involves creating an oversimplified and generalized image of a group of people, often based on race, nationality, religion, or other characteristics. This technique reinforces existing prejudices and can be used to justify discrimination or hostility. For example, wartime propaganda might depict the enemy as cruel or inhuman, using stereotypes to justify harsh treatment or violence against them. 26. Virtue signaling, displaying moral values for approval. Virtue. Signaling is a technique where individuals or organizations publicly display certain values or moral stances to gain approval or support without necessarily acting on those values. This technique focuses on appearance rather than substance. For example, a company might promote environmental sustainability in its advertising while continuing to engage in environmentally harmful practices, using the appearance of virtue to attract customers. 27. Appeal to snobbery, suggesting superiority through exclusivity. Appeal to snobbery is a technique that suggests that those who adopt a certain idea, product, or behavior are superior or more elite than others. This technique appeals to people's desire to be part of an exclusive or prestigious group. For example, a luxury brand might suggest that owning their product sets the consumer apart as someone with refined taste and higher social status. 28. Red herring, distracting from the main issue. A red herring is a technique that involves introducing an irrelevant or distracting issue to divert attention from the main argument or topic. This technique is used to mislead or confuse the audience. For example, during a political debate, a candidate might bring up an unrelated scandal to distract from their own policy weaknesses, shifting the focus away from the original issue. 29. Appeal to authority, citing experts to support an argument. Appeal to authority involves citing an expert or authority figure to support an argument, regardless of whether the authority is relevant to the topic. This technique relies on the perceived credibility of the expert to persuade the audience. For instance, a company might use a celebrity endorsement to sell a product, even if the celebrity has no expertise related to the product. Propaganda techniques are powerful tools for influencing public opinion, shaping perceptions, and guiding behavior. By understanding these techniques, we can become more aware of how information is presented to us and develop the critical thinking skills necessary to evaluate it objectively. Whether in politics, advertising, or media, recognizing propaganda allows us to make more informed decisions and resist manipulation. The ability to critically analyze messages and discern their underlying intentions is essential for navigating the complex information landscape of the modern world.